My name is Eudora Mayfield. I'm 81 years old. I've lived long enough to see the seasons of life turn over and over. Marriage, motherhood, retirement, the quiet ache of losing old friends, and the slow slip of family visits growing fewer with time. I raised 3 children, buried one, and have spent the last 20 years in a quiet ranch-style home on the edge of a small Texas town called Willow Ridge. I thought I had seen all that life could throw at me. But nothing. Not my husband's mood swings, not the bitterness of growing old and silence, could have prepared me for the night my baby sister came to visit. It was a Thursday, late fall. You could smell the cold creeping in through the window panes. My sister, Lottie, had just flown in from Ohio. She's 68, lively and full of spirit, and though we hadn't seen each other in years, she'd finally promised to come spend a few weeks with me. She wanted to check in on Big Sis, she said, laughing over the phone. I cleaned up the guest room, baked the pumpkin muffins she loved as a child, and even pulled out the good quilt, my mother's quilt. We were supposed to spend time laughing over old memories, talking about our grandkids, knitting on the porch like we used to do when we were girls sitting under Mama's clothesline. But by the next morning, everything had changed. That night, I woke up to the sound of muffled sobbing. I thought maybe Lottie was having a nightmare. She had trouble sleeping on new beds. I wrapped my robe around me, shuffled down the hallway with the help of my cane, and gently pushed her door open. And what I saw, I will never unsee. Lottie was curled into the corner of the bed, clutching the sheet like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her body was shaking. Her lip was bleeding. And my husband, James, stood there, shirtless, red-faced, and breathing like a wild animal. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. Not then. But the fire that lit in my bones in that moment, it hasn't gone out since. Before we go on, let me welcome you here. If you're new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button, like this story if it's already pulling at your heart, and turn on the notifications so you never miss another emotional journey like this one. Also, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me feel like I'm not telling this story alone. You see, I didn't scream that night. I didn't fight him. I didn't call the police. But I did start planning something. I met James Mayfield in the spring of 1963. Back then, he wasn't the kind of man you feared. Well, he was charming, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, with a smile that could melt the frost off any preacher's daughter. I was 19, working as a waitress at Miss Hattie's diner just off Route 17. He came in every Friday after his shift at the auto shop, always ordering the same thing: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a chocolate malt. He was polite, generous with tips, funny in a soft-spoken way. I didn't know back then how dangerous a quiet man with secrets could be. We married in '65, had our first baby by the end of the year. I was already deep in the life by the time I noticed the cracks. The yelling came first, never in public, always behind closed doors. Then the silence. The days where he wouldn't say a word to me, wouldn't even look at the children. But whenever I packed my things, thinking I'd leave, he'd pull me back in. He'd cry, apologize, blame the war, the economy, his father's drinking. I believed him. Most women did back then. We were taught to stick it out, keep the home, honor the vows, be strong. I kept thinking, he's not all bad. He just needs help. But help never came. Instead, the bad days became worse days. Bruises became part of my wardrobe. The children learned to play quietly, to never raise their voices, to disappear when the air got heavy. Still I stayed. I had nowhere else to go. And I kept holding on to those few good memories, like a fool holding on to ashes hoping for fire. But Lottie saw through him immediately. Even as a child, my sister was quick to sense when something wasn't right. When she came to visit as a teenager, she'd say, "Dory, why doesn't James ever laugh? Why's he always watching you like that?" I brushed her off, told her she was being silly. But the truth was, I was scared of what she might find. Scared she'd make me face the reality I'd carefully folded away. Years passed. We drifted apart. Life and miles kept us distant. She married, had a life of her own, and I stayed here in this house pretending it was home. Until last week. When she called, her voice was shaky but excited. "I miss you, Dory. I want to see you before the snow hits. Can I come stay a while?" My heart leapt. I hadn't had anyone visit in years, not since my oldest daughter stopped talking to me after I refused to move into a nursing home. "Yes," I said. "Please come. I need you." She arrived with 2 suitcases and a scarf that smelled like lavender and hope. We laughed the whole first evening, talked about Mama, about the time we got caught stealing peaches from old Mr. Tate's orchard, and about how we both had bad knees now. For a few hours, I forgot who I was married to. I forgot how heavy the air could feel in this house. But James didn't forget. And I think, deep down, he hated the sound of my laughter with her. He hated being reminded that there was a version of me he hadn't broken. So when I went to bed that night, smiling and full of warm memories, I had no idea what he was planning. But Lottie did. She told me the next morning, her voice hoarse, her hands shaking. She told me everything. And I made a promise, quiet, burning promise, that he would pay. The morning after felt like moving through a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The sky outside was a dull gray, and the sun refused to shine through the kitchen windows. The coffee pot gurgled like it always did at 6:15, but the air in the house was different, thicker, heavier, like it knew what had happened. I found Lottie sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in Mama's old quilt, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. She didn't even look up when I opened the door. I sat beside her, careful not to touch her too quickly. Her body was still trembling. "Did he hurt you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to me slowly, like someone pulling themselves out of quicksand. Then, with a voice so soft I could barely hear it, she said, "He came into my room after you went to bed. He said you were asleep, that you wouldn't hear anything." I stopped breathing. "I tried to fight," she whispered. "But he's stronger." No. I just froze. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Not just for her, but for every time I looked away, every time I made excuses for his temper, every time I told myself it wasn't that bad. 'Cause now it was. And it was my sister. I took her hand in mine. "I'm so sorry, Lottie. I should have left him years ago." She looked me dead in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. "Then leave him now." But it wasn't that simple. James wasn't the kind of man you left. Not without consequences. He had control over everything, our money, our house, even my medications. He had made sure that over the years, I'd become dependent on him in every way that mattered. And worse, I was too old to run. Too old to start over. Or so I thought. That night, while James watched TV in the living room like nothing had happened, I sat in the laundry room, door locked, notebook in hand. I wrote down everything. Every bruise, every threat, every dollar he'd taken. And then I wrote a new list, one with names and numbers. My granddaughter in Michigan who worked in law enforcement, the women's shelter in Austin, a lawyer I knew from church whose wife used to bring me soup. I wasn't sure what I was planning. But I knew this much. He would never touch Lottie or anyone again. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in decades. I looked him in the eye. He was eating eggs and bacon, humming like the devil in disguise. "You're not gonna get away with this," I said. He laughed, that slow, cruel laugh I'd come to know too well. "Who's gonna believe you? An old woman and a guest who barely lives here. Don't be stupid, Eudora." But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I had something stronger than fear. I had witnesses, had a sister, and I had nothing left to lose. I waited until James left the house. He usually drove to the corner store around 10 a.m. every Saturday to buy a newspaper and talk nonsense with the men at the feed shop like he hadn't ruined people's lives the night before. As soon as his truck rumbled out of the driveway, I locked the door behind him. My hands were shaking as I picked up the old cordless phone in the kitchen. It still had that yellowed plastic from years of sun hitting it through the window, but it worked. Dialed slow. Not because I didn't know the number, but because once I called, I couldn't go back. Ring. Ring. Then, "Hello. Gracie. It's Grandma." My granddaughter sounded surprised. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. Last time, she begged me to come stay with her in Michigan. I told her I was fine. That James was still good to me most days. What a lie. Now I had no more lies left. I need your help, I said, my voice cracking. Grandma, are you okay? What's wrong? Closed my eyes. And then I told her everything. I told her about James. About the years of control. About the bruises, the insults, the way he'd chipped away at me piece by piece until I wasn't even myself anymore. Then I told her what happened to Lottie. There was silence on the other end of the line. Just breathing. Sharp, angry breathing. Then finally, Grandma, I'm coming. And we're not going to let him get away with this. Her words felt like oxygen. But I wasn't finished yet. I made 3 more calls that day. First, to the women's shelter in Austin. They gave me a contact at a local advocacy group that helped senior women escape abuse. Second, to my pastor's wife. She always said, "Call me if you ever need help," and I figured it was time to test whether those church words held weight. Turns out they did. And finally I called the lawyer, Mr. Davidson. His wife, Lorraine, used to crochet with me in the community center before her stroke. He agreed to come by discreetly the next day. By the time James got home, the eggs were cold, but I had fire in my chest. And for the first time in years I felt in control. He looked at me suspiciously when he walked in. Maybe he felt the shift in the air. Or maybe he noticed how Lottie stayed in her room, door locked. "Everything all right?" he asked. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Not for you." He chuckled. "You losing your mind, old woman?" "No," I said. "I think I'm finally finding it." That night, Lottie came into my room. She hugged me. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. We were sisters again. Stronger than our fear. And we were planning. Because once a woman like me decides to fight, there's no stopping her. Sunday morning came quiet, but I could feel it. Trouble brewing under the floorboards. I woke up early, before the birds even began their song. I made coffee the way I always did, careful not to make a sound. Lottie was still asleep. I let her rest. She hadn't had a full night's sleep since that terrible Thursday. I could see the toll it had taken, her face pale, her eyes dark with worry. By 9 a.m., Mr. Davidson's car pulled into the driveway. I told him to park behind the barn so James wouldn't see it when he came home from church. James had taken to going alone on Sundays the past few years. Said I moved too slow. The truth was, he didn't want anyone seeing the bruises he left behind. Not even God. Mr. Davidson came in through the back door, hat in hand, suit pressed like he still cared about appearances. His voice was soft, his eyes serious. "I don't know all of what's happened, Mrs. Mayfield," he said. "But I know enough to tell you, you've got options." He pulled out a folder and laid it on the kitchen table. Restraining orders. Emergency removal from the property. Protective services. He told me about an agency in Dallas that worked specifically with elderly women trying to escape abusive households. "I've seen women in your position before," he said gently. "And I've seen them come out stronger on the other side." I nodded, gripping my cane tighter. I wasn't afraid of starting over. I was afraid of what James would do when he realized I'd started. Just as Mr. Davidson was walking Lottie through the next steps. Her legal statement, the hospital records she'd need, the police contact he'd already reached out to, we heard it. The slamming of the front door. James was home. And he wasn't alone. Through the hallway I saw his face. Red. Wedding. And with him his brother Roy, a man twice his size with half his sense. James always called him in when he needed backup. The kind of backup that didn't ask questions. James looked around and saw the manila folders on the table. Saw Mr. Davidson. Saw Lottie standing tall in the corner of the kitchen. Her chin raised in defiance. His face twisted into something I'd only seen once before. The day he slammed our son's dog against the porch wall because it chewed his shoes. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed the coffee pot and hurled it across the room. Glass shattered everywhere. Lottie screamed. Mr. Davidson stepped in front of me, shielding me like a wall. But James wasn't done. "You think you can take my wife from me," he spat. "My house. After all these years." "No one's taking anything," I said, rising from my chair. My voice didn't shake. "Not this time. You already took more than I had to give. And I'm taking it back now." Roy tried to step forward, but Lottie stood in his path, holding a broom like a sword. "You'll have to go through me first," she growled. James froze. Maybe for the first time in his life, he saw us not as weak women, but as a wall he couldn't knock down. Mr. Davidson pulled out his phone. "The sheriff's already on his way. I suggest you sit down and keep your mouth shut." James turned to me then. But the look in his eyes had changed. He wasn't in control anymore. It was, "You're going to regret this," he hissed. I leaned in close enough for him to smell the courage on my breath. "I've been regretting you for 57 years. He blinked, and for the first time he looked small. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up the driveway just minutes after James stormed out the back door, cursing and pacing like a caged dog. His brother Roy stood by the porch, chewing a toothpick and pretending not to care. But I could see it in his eyes, fear. The kind that creeps in when a bully realizes the game's finally over. Sheriff Klein was a tall, slow-moving man in his 60s, the kind who never raised his voice unless he meant business. He stepped out of his vehicle, eyes scanning the house, his hand resting on the top of his belt. "Morning, Eudora," he said kindly, tipping his hat. "Got your call. And a few others, too." He frowned. "Others?" He nodded and stepped inside. Lottie and Mr. Davidson were sitting at the kitchen table, folders open, everything laid bare. The sheriff's gaze settled on Lottie first, her split lip, her bruised wrist. Then on the shattered glass still on the floor. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked her. She nodded slowly. "I will be. As long as that man never lays a finger on another woman again." Sheriff Klein took a deep breath, then looked over at me. "Eudora," he said slowly, "I'm going to ask you something serious, and I want the truth. Has James Mayfield ever laid hands on you or anyone else in this house, without permission?" The room fell silent. I didn't blink. "Yes," I said. "For years. And last week, he raped my sister." Lottie's eyes filled with tears. But she nodded. "It's true." The sheriff didn't flinch. "I believe you," he said. "In fact, that's why I'm here." He pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. "We've been watching James for months. Your granddaughter Gracie reached out to us after a phone call you made to her last year. She had concerns. Then a few other reports came in, from women in town. Employees at the hardware store. One nurse at the VA clinic. Nothing ever stuck." He was careful, quiet. "But we've been building a case." My mouth went dry. "You mean, this wasn't just about us?" Sheriff Klein shook his head. "James Mayfield is a suspect in multiple investigations involving coercion, assault, and intimidation. What happened to your sister might be the piece that finally breaks it open." Lottie clutched my hand. Mr. Davidson leaned forward. "So what now?" The sheriff looked toward the back door, where James was still pacing in the yard like he owned the world. "Now," the sheriff said, "we take him in." He stepped outside, calm as ever, but with steel in his voice. "James Mayfield, you're under arrest." James turned, stunned. "You can't arrest me in my own yard." "You don't own the law, James," the sheriff said, sliding handcuffs from his belt. "And you sure as hell don't own the women in that house." James didn't fight. He just stood there, his hands shaking, his face pale, like the world had finally stopped spinning in his favor. As the sheriff cuffed him and read him his rights, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Relief. But just as I was about to step back inside, Sheriff Klein turned to me and said one last thing. "There's something else, Eudora. Something we found on his old laptop. You're going to want to sit down for this." My heart dropped. There was more. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped tight around a warm cup of tea that had long gone cold. Sheriff Klein stood near the sink, hat off now. His face tighter than I'd ever seen it. Lottie sat across from me, eyes darting between him and the folders still open. Mr. Davidson stayed quiet, listening closely. His legal pad ready but untouched. Sheriff Klein cleared his throat. When we seized James's laptop during a prior investigation, we didn't find much. He was careful. Wiped most of it clean, probably using programs he didn't learn from TV. But the state forensic team ran a deeper scan. There were files, hidden, buried under encrypted folders with fake names. I swallowed hard. What kind of files? Yes. The sheriff looked at me gently, like a man who didn't want to say what he had to. Videos, Eudora. A lot of them. Some going back almost 20 years. Lottie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I felt my stomach twist. Videos of what? He hesitated. Women. Some were visitors, some employees from his old auto shop, even a few nurses from the VA clinic he volunteered at. He filmed them without their knowledge. Some, he paused. Some looked unconscious. Closed my eyes. The room spun. Mr. Davidson looked stunned. This turns everything into a federal matter. It already is, Sheriff Klein said grimly. We sent the files to the FBI last week. But I wanted you to know before this all hits the press. Because this house, this man, he wasn't just abusive. He was dangerous, calculated, and a predator in every sense of the word. I reached for Lottie's hand, and for the first time since that horrible night, she looked truly shaken. I thought I was the only one, she whispered. I looked her in the eyes. You were never the only one, baby. You were just the first one to speak up. That's when I realized, this wasn't just a family tragedy. This was a ripple effect, stretching across town lines, touching lives we didn't even know James had stained. And I had been part of the silence for too long. I want to testify, I said firmly. Me and Lottie. If there's going to be a trial, we'll stand in front of any jury and tell them everything. Sheriff Klein gave a slow nod. I'll make sure the right people know that. As he prepared to leave, I asked, what happens now? We keep building the case. He's in county jail for now, but with these new charges, he'll be moved soon. With what we have, he won't see another day of freedom. And the town, they'll know the truth. As the door shut behind him, silence fell over the house again. But this silence felt different. It wasn't heavy with fear. It was filled with something new. Clarity. Lottie looked at me. What if people blame us? Say we should have spoken up sooner. I shook my head. They might. But people will always talk. What matters is we stopped him. Before someone else's daughter or sister or mother became the next file on his laptop. Mr. Davidson stood. You two did more than just speak up. You started a fire. And he was right. Because once truth starts to burn, there's no putting it out. 2 days passed before I got the call. It was just after sunrise, and the house was still wrapped in morning stillness. Lottie had finally slept through the night, and I was outside on the porch, wrapped in Mama's quilt, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. Then the phone rang. I let it go once, twice. Something in my chest tightened. I knew it wasn't a neighbor or a friend. Not that early. Not with everything going on. By the third ring I picked it up. Hello. Hi, Mom. My breath caught in my throat. It was Ruth, my youngest daughter. The one who hadn't called me in 5 years. The one who stopped speaking to me after I refused to leave James. She used to beg me to come live with her in Arizona. I always told her I was fine. That James had settled down. That things were peaceful now. Lie after lie after lie. And Ruth, smart, stubborn Ruth, finally stopped trying. Till now. Hi, I whispered. I didn't expect to hear from you. I saw the news, she said. I saw the arrest. I saw your name. Silence hung between us. Then in a voice I'd never heard from her, tight, low, trembling, she said, You should have told me what he did to me when I was a child. My body went cold. Ruth, what? I thought I imagined it, Mom. All those years. The way he'd sneak into my room. The way he'd brush my hair and tell me not to tell anyone. I thought it was just a bad dream. Tears flooded my eyes. No, I said. No, don't say that. He never told me, he never. But I stopped. Because deep down I had known something was wrong. She used to cry in her sleep. She used to flinch when he came near. And I, like so many mothers before me, told myself it was nothing. Told myself she was safe. Told myself lies so I wouldn't have to face the storm I wasn't brave enough to fight. I'm sorry, I whispered. I failed you. There was another long silence. Then she said, he's never touched my kids. And he never will. 'Cause you stopped him. You finally stopped him. I started sobbing. Not quiet tears. Real ones. Ugly ones. The kind that come when you realize the truth you've been hiding from has already lived and died inside someone else. Can I come see you? She asked, her voice softening. Not just to talk. I want to see you. I want to know who you are now. Not the woman who stayed with him, but the one who stood up to him. I closed my eyes and held the phone to my heart for a second. Yes, I said. Please come home. When I hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, letting the wind dry my cheeks. Then I walked inside and told Lottie everything. We cried together again. But this time the tears weren't just for pain. They were for healing. Ruth arrived 3 days later. She pulled up in a rental car, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Her mouth set in a line that told me she wasn't here for comfort. She was here for truth. She stepped out slowly, not rushing, not smiling. I stood on the porch with Lottie, my hands clenched together so tightly I could feel my own heartbeat in my palms. For a moment, Ruth didn't say a word. Then she walked toward me, arms folded. She stopped just a foot away, looked me dead in the eye and said, I forgive you. But I'm not going to lie to you. I'm still angry. I nodded, tears brimming. You have every right to be. She looked past me into the old house. Is it true? Everything he did. All of it, I said. And more. She stepped inside slowly like she was walking into a crime scene. Her eyes scanned the pictures on the wall, the memories trapped in the furniture. She was quiet until we reached the back hallway. This place feels smaller, she said. It always was, I whispered. We sat in the living room that afternoon. 3 women scarred by the same man, just in different ways. Ruth didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just asked questions, direct, painful questions. And I answered every one. Then, just as the sun began to fall behind the trees, Ruth said something that changed everything. I was cleaning out Dad's old toolbox in the garage when I came in, she said. Looking for some old photos he used to keep. Found a key. A little brass one. I felt my breath hitch. James had a drawer in his workshop that he always kept locked. I never asked what was in it. I wasn't allowed in there. His private space, he called it. Stay out of my business. He used to bark if I so much as looked in its direction. I think it opens that drawer, Ruth said quietly. We all walked out to the garage, the air thick with tension. The old workbench sat untouched, covered in dust and oil. Ruth bent down, found the drawer and slid the key in. Turned. Click. She opened it slowly. Inside there was a small black journal. Bound in leather. Thick with pages. We all stared at it like it was a loaded weapon. Ruth handed it to me. My hands shook as I opened to the first page. January 1975. She screamed. I told her to be quiet. I said it was just love. But she screamed anyway. I slammed the book shut. Lottie covered her mouth. Ruth turned pale. We sat down right there on the concrete floor and read every page. Dozens of entries. Details. Some we recognized. Some we didn't. Women from town. Visitors. Even employees at his old shop. Each entry was more chilling than the last. Confessions from a man who believed he'd never be caught. A man who took pride in what he did. Who justified it? Who documented it? There were even notes about Ruth. About her friends from school. About the way he kept control over me. He wrote about threats. He wrote about silencing. He wrote about us. By the time we reached the last page, we were all crying. Not because we were surprised, but because deep down we always knew. That night, we gave the journal to Mr. Davidson. Within hours, he had it in the hands of the sheriff, and within the day, federal agents had picked up James from the county jail and transferred him to a maximum security facility. This journal wasn't just evidence. It was proof. Proof we weren't crazy. Proof we weren't making it up. Proof the pain was real. And now it would be seen by a courtroom, by a judge, by the world. The courthouse in Willow Ridge had never seen so many people in one place. Reporters, activists, old neighbors I hadn't seen in decades. Women I'd only known in passing, some from church, others from the grocery store or the doctor's office, all sitting shoulder to shoulder in that wooden room, waiting to hear the truth come to light. James sat at the front, shackled, smaller than I'd ever seen him. His hair was thinner. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like the monster finally caught. Beside me sat Lottie, her hand locked in mine. On my other side was Ruth, strong and still, her presence alone giving me more courage than I'd ever had in my life. Mr. Davidson rose from the bench and began to speak. He didn't hold back. He laid out every page of James's journal, every entry, every victim. He read lines aloud that made grown men weep and mothers turn away. And then, he called me to the stand. I stood up slowly. My knees ached, and my hands trembled around my cane. But my voice, steady. I was married to James Mayfield for 57 years, I said, my eyes locking with the jury. And for most of that time I lived in a house that looked normal on the outside, but was full of fear, shame, and silence. I told them about the bruises, about the lies I told my children, about the Thursday night my sister came to visit, about the journal, and about the years I wasted thinking I wasn't strong enough to leave. But I did leave, I said, standing a little taller. Not with a suitcase, but with the truth. And once you step into the light, you don't go back to the dark. The room was silent when I stepped down. Then they called Ruth. Then Lottie. Each of us, piece by piece, building the wall that would bury him forever. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict, guilty on every count. The judge sentenced him to 8 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. James didn't speak as he was led away. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize. He just kept his eyes down, like even he couldn't bear to see the women who finally broke his hold. Weeks passed. Life settled. The news vans left. The town moved on. But inside our little house in Willow Ridge, something new was blooming. Lottie stayed with me. Ruth too at first. Then she bought the house across the road. My grandkids started visiting again. Little feet running through my halls, laughter in every room. One morning Ruth brought me a box. Inside was a nameplate. Eudora Bell Sampson. My maiden name. You don't have to wear his name anymore, she said softly. I looked at the gold letters. Then at my daughter. I never did, I whispered. It just took me a while to remember who I was. We held a small gathering the following Sunday. Not a funeral. A celebration. A porch full of women who had once felt small. A circle of survivors. We sang, we cried, we prayed. And I told them, you are not too old to start over. You are not too broken to be whole again. And you are never, ever too late to speak up. This wasn't just the end of James Mayfield. It was the beginning of us. Free, strong, and finally heard. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story moved you, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful story. And please, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. I want to know who's listening, who's healing, and